We'd ask that everyone could please keep their mic and during the duration of the discussion, but also to know that after our incredible panelists have been able to speak, there will be a time for questions and answers and engagement from the audience. So please keep all of your questions. You are also welcome to write them in the chat function. But my colleague Lwazi, who I'll be introducing as the chair, will then be calling on participants of the meeting to all of you to raise your hands using the raising hand function if you're able to, otherwise to write in the chat, and then you can come in during that section with your questions and answers. Please also note that this meeting will be live streamed on Facebook. And so we might have some engagement from members watching on Facebook there. And that everyone, by being in this meeting, is consenting to being recorded. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Lwazi Somia, who will be chairing this meeting and introducing our panelists. Thank you, Lwazi.
Thank you so much, Lily, for that introduction. So we meet at a very, very interesting time in South Africa's history, one that is not only a monumental shift in the post-democratic and post-colonial society of our nation, but also one that presents an opportunity of re-engaging and one that presents us as an opportunity of trying to push forward regional dialogues on the issue and pressure points. South Africa's Government of National Unity, as proposed by the African National Congress in its intent statement more recently, has presented a unique situation for the SADC region. Historically, what we have seen, especially in situations such as Zimbabwe, is when liberation movements lose control of power, there's a tendency of not ascending and accepting the democratic principles. But in the South African context, what we have seen from the African National Congress is the acceptance of these principles of democracy and the people's will, and allowing other actors to come on board to define the national agenda and to define the national interest in terms of policies and priorities. And this is why we come together to convene concerning the issues around how do we now build upon South Africa's foreign policy approach towards the region, in particular towards our neighbors in the region, in particular in Zimbabwe. As we have seen in the previous election in Zimbabwe, there were traverse outcomes as the SADC Observer Mission outlined a number of democratic deficits within Zimbabwe's body politic in the lead up towards the elections, during the elections and post-elections. However, what we have seen historically, South Africa has played a very critical role in interventions that have been facilitated in Zimbabwe, ranging back before 2008, when various South African missions were deployed in Zimbabwe to discuss issues around democracy and human rights. Following the elections of 2008, there was a global political agreement in which South Africa played a key role as a mediator in the violence following the 2008 elections in Zimbabwe. And more recently, around 2021 and 2020, South Africa has deployed various envoys towards Zimbabwe as an outcome of various democratic deficits, the arrest of civilians, and along with the clamping down of the democratic space. As we've seen the last 30 years, foreign policy has been dominated by the African National Congress, as they have been the majority party in South Africa's democratic dispensation. Along with that, the ANC has tried to play a cordial and a momentum building role in terms of the foreign policy approach. However, the democratic deficits have continued to be perpetuated within Zimbabwe, resulting in migrant influxes, making the Zimbabwean issue not only a foreign policy issue, but a domestic policy issue. So today, we've convened different political parties within South Africa's body politic to discuss what are their perspectives on South Africa's future foreign policy approach towards the situation in Zimbabwe, fully understanding that the foreign policy approach will be co-created by various political parties represented not only within the GNU, but the National Assembly at large. So we have the ANC in this discussion, represented by former Deputy Minister Opepapela. We have Rise Mzansi in this discussion, represented by Gondima. And we have the United Democratic Movement, represented by Mr. Bantu Olomis. And all these panelists will contribute. And also we have responded, Abna Mosase from the ANC, to unpack what is the potential roles that can play going forward within the situation in Zimbabwe, and what is the perspective of these various political parties that will chime into the government of national unity and chart forward South Africa's foreign policy approach. Let me get this discussion started. I would like to introduce our first speaker. He is he's a current member of parliament and leader of the United Democratic Movement, Bantu Olomis. Dada, I would like for you to unpack what is the United Democratic Movement's position on the situation in Zimbabwe? What will the UDM bring into foreign policy in South Africa's approach towards the situation in Zimbabwe? And what are your thoughts over the last 30 or so years of South Africa's intervention in Zimbabwe? Dada, over to you. Mr. Olomisa?
No.
Mr. Olomisa?
I can hear you.
Oh, yes, you may come on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairperson, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen on this platform, good morning. Thank you to the South African Liaison Office for the invitation to participate in the dialogue and for hosting this event. We have been asked to delve into the implications and future directions following South Africa's recent elections, which have resulted in a government of national unity. Hopefully we will find each other in the next 3 days, and to explore potential shifts or entry points in South Africa's approach to Zimbabwe. The question is there an opportunity for a new direction? Given that government of national unity will have to formulate new foreign policies and that all the role players will have different stances on various key international relationships, it appears there are opportunities to make significant changes to foreign policies. The next step is sovereignty versus regional interest of Zimbabwe. For years, the United Democratic Movement has held the view that the issue of Zimbabwe places us between two conflicting concepts of modern international politics. On the one hand, there is the concept of sovereignty, and on the other, there's the concept of regional interests, such as cooperation and stability. We appreciate that South Africa had to perform this balancing act of respecting Zimbabwe's sovereignty and attempt to address the deterioration of various aspects within that country. On a humanitarian level, the suffering of the Zimbabwean people and the massive exodus of citizens from that country to neighboring countries is a serious matter that places a heavy burden on neighboring countries. It is the general suffering of ordinary citizens, black and white alike, that is of great concern, rather than the interest of small class of special interests that must command our response. There has also been greater pressure in South Africa that criminal elements are entering the country with military-grade weapons who perpetrate crime in this country in levels greater than in the past. Zama-zamas are springing up, operated by foreign nationals, cash in transit highs at an all-time high. We have recently heard of buses full of unaccompanied minor children being bused into South Africa from Zimbabwe. If, as there seems to be general consensus, regional interest weighs the concept of sovereignty, we must bear in mind a number of factors. Firstly, since it is an issue of regional concern, the region as a whole, and not just South Africa on its own, must seek a solution for Zimbabwe, precisely because of the role it plays in Southern African Development Community, that is SADC. It is time for SADC to show the resolve and moral courage to deal with the crisis that threatens to topple one of its key members and to destabilize the whole region. Secondly, we cannot ignore a country's sovereignty completely, even under the banner of SADC. If there is consensus that Zimbabwe is threatening the region's stability and economy, the region, through SADC, must now act concertedly to address the problems. In conclusion, the UDM is of the view that SADC countries must have an immediate leadership summit to discuss the issue of closer cooperation regarding regional stability, cross-border crimes such as hijacking, cash in transit heists, human trafficking, the use of military-grade guns in crime, Zama-zamas, the environment, etc., etc. Such a step, I have no doubt in my mind, it will yield good results. We have to be open to each other. Let the National Security Council of South Africa brief the entire region in that summit. And each country must do the same, because some people cause problems in South Africa as South Africans, and they run across and seek refuge in those countries. So there's something in common which we have to nip in the bud. Lastly, there is a proposal here in South Africa that we should have a national dialogue to look into the road we have traveled since 1994. I have no doubt in my mind that the cooperation of countries in Southern Africa will feature prominently in those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Olomisa, for your input on this discussion, especially reminding us the interconnected nature between our countries and our people, and along with some of the challenges that we may face as neighbors in this country. And thank you for reminding us the necessity of the national dialogue. And I hope this dialogue itself form some form of our platform and foundations towards the contributions of various political actors towards that national dialogue. And I know the UDM has been very, very, very...
You're muted, Lwazi.
Oh, sorry about that. I know the UDM have been very adamant about this national dialogue, especially concerning how do we bring each other together, finding consensus amongst various parties, and how do we now build our national interests and national vision collectively. So thank you so much, Mr. Olomisa, for your contributions and the UDM's perspective towards South Africa's potential and entry points towards our foreign policy towards Zimbabwe. I would now like to bring on the new kids on the block within South Africa's body politic, Rise Mzansi, through its national spokesperson, Gugu Ndima. Gugu, as the new kids on the block within South Africa, and also now an active member of the Government of National Unity, what is your perspective on South Africa's foreign policy approach towards Zimbabwe? And what new ideas does Rise Mzansi have to bring to the table towards what role we could play with our neighbors in terms of not only interventions, but also general relationship within the SADC region? Over to you, Gugu.
Thank you so much, Lwazi. Thanks a lot. Just to put it in context, firstly, I think in terms of foreign policy, a well-considered, effective, and consistent foreign policy is critical for any government, for a country's development and stability, especially in a globalized world. Now, we believe that the South African foreign policy also should at all times reflect our values of human rights and constitutional democracy based on self-determination, government by and for the people, and social justice, which is quite imperative. But also just speaking to what the general had indicated, any foreign policy should prioritize advancing of our economic development, which would include securing preferential access to priority markets. We know that on the continent, we've got the Africa Free Trade Agreement, which is quite imperative in terms of goods movement and so forth, and attract foreign direct investment, of course. But the second issue, which I think speaks to what the engagement is today, is advancing Africa's development, which is peace and security, one, independence, and also unity and regional integration. Now, it's kind of... Sorry?
Could you have your video on, please?
Oh. Sorry about that. Yeah. Can you see me now?
Not yet.
Okay, let's just try. I don't know if it's my technical issues. Okay, I don't know what's going on, but can I continue talking? I think
I'll be... Sorry about that.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that. So just in terms of the issues we've got with Zimbabwe, we believe as Rise Mzansi, it's been the management of immigration, right? If you look at what we currently have as a crisis, we believe that poor management and administration of immigration over many years has resulted in hardening attitudes to immigration. And this speaks to what extent do leaders of this particular region, SADC, hold each other accountable? Because the issue we've got with Zimbabwe is not primarily just a Zimbabwean issue. You've got the issue of what the general spoke to, Amazamazama, which is also a Lesotho issue. So in as much as we've got these trade agreements, which is quite important to the development of SADC, which is quite important to economic development. But when it comes to law enforcement, this is where the weaknesses have demonstrated or showed themselves. If you look at just the issue of porous borders, for example, you don't just have the South African officials that you need to speak to, but you've also got Zimbabwean officials that are there. So the question becomes, who is holding who accountable and what is causing this continuously? If you listen to what the Patriotic Alliance said, for example, during its election campaign, it was this monumentous slogan of Abahambi. And it resonated with a lot of people. But the question becomes, even if you do mass deportations, are you dealing with the administrative issues at an official, at a government level, where people are bestowed with the responsibility of ensuring that law is enforced, people adhere to the law, and more importantly, if leadership at that level, senior level in particular, are holding each other accountable for the porous borders, for what's currently happening, where we see high increased levels of crime, where we don't have people we can account for when we see cases of crime. So from our side, we believe that we should prioritize dramatically reducing irregular immigration immigration, ease entry into South Africa of skilled workers that are needed, but within the legal confines, but also develop a realistic and practical approach to managing regional migration, which is very important. It's inevitable from an economic standpoint, you need regional integration, but you need to be able to manage it. And also increase public trust in the management of immigration. So in as much as there is this priority of mass deportation from others that we've heard, the crux of the matter is, are we having a cultural reorientation across the board in terms of law enforcement? Are we holding each other accountable in the SADC region? And do we understand the ramifications of what is currently underway in terms of the implications of it? As the general had indicated, that you've got infrastructure that is being dilapidated, infrastructure that is being eroded. Amazamazama, we've seen how it's causing mass serious problems across Johannesburg. So these are imperative questions that we need to interrogate on. But Rise Mzansi believes that it's not an immigrant issue, but it's a management of immigration, it's law enforcement, and ensuring that all leaders of the SADC region are being held accountable as we move towards ensuring that we integrate SADC.
Thank you so much, Gugu, for your contributions and reminding us about not only the necessity for regional integration, but the necessity for law enforcement itself. As we remember, South Africa was last year grey-listed in the Financial Action Task Force due to some aspects around illicit financial flows within the region. And I believe National Treasury is trying to make ways towards dealing with that. But however, there needs to be some form of dialogue and hopefully some of the aspects around irregular migration and along with trying to curb issues around the Financial Action Task Force. Political parties will chime in within the government of national unity, as it is imperative for South Africa to make it out of the grey listing, along with our normalization and of relations with our regional neighbors, in order for us to allow that regional integration as aspired by the African Continental Future Agreement. So I thank you so much.
And I apologize for the video. It doesn't want me to be great today. Sorry.
So sincerely, we appreciate your contributions, even though the video was undermining you. So thank you so much, Gugu. Our next speaker is the Deputy Chairperson of the ANC's International Relations Committee, along with then as ANC NEC member and former Deputy Minister for the South African government, Obed Babela. I can't call you honorable member, but Mr. Babela, we've come such a long way over the last 30 years as a country concerning South Africa's relations with the region. The ANC has been central in South Africa's foreign policy making with the introduction of the GNU and all of these aspects that might influence how South Africa's approach towards Zimbabwe. But I would like for you to chime in on the ANC's approach over the last 30 years, along with what is the ANC's thinking entering the government of national unity on our relations with Zimbabwe from a foreign policy perspective, along with from a domestic policy perspective. Over to you, Mr. Babela.
No, thank you very much, Babo Lwazi, and to the leadership of SALO. And also greetings to my fellow panelists, the UDM leader, General Bandolo Misa, and the rep from Rise Mzansi, Ukukundi Ndima, and all participants who are in the platform. I can see academia, research institutions, foreign affairs practitioners, and activists that have joined us. With those greetings, let me premise my input, firstly, to join the many South Africans in pledging their condolences to the families who lost their loved ones in east of the DRC in recent weeks and up to yesterday, when 2 more soldiers got killed and about 20 of them injured, and hope that they have a speedy recovery. The SA foreign policy, its foundation is the Freedom Charter. And then if you look at all of it, as is the document policy currently, obviously subjected to further engagements and discussions in the GNU, it is founding itself on that basis, particularly clause number 10, which is there shall be peace and friendship, as was adopted 26th of June in 1955. That was the Congress of the People that met and then charted a way forward for a kind of South Africa we wanted to live in, and including the foreign aspects of it. And in CONDESA, later 1992 to 1994, leading to the elections, there was again a multi-party organization that met to chart a way forward for a South Africa and freedom and type of democracy we wanted in South Africa. 30 years thereafter, here we are calling for a national dialogue, and I think there's much consensus that it is definitely needed. And that's how South Africa has charted its way forward, by coming together to debate, to discuss, and then chart a way forward. So we welcome this national dialogue, which obviously some of the policy positions that are there in the current form will have to be reviewed, will have to be relooked what worked and what didn't work. And those that have worked well, we'll keep them. But those that there are issues that needed some kind of a rethink and thought, will definitely be looking at them in that particular way. So therefore, the foundation of our policy is based on that. And if you go into the close elements of it, the Freedom Charter, it's respecting of the rights and sovereignty of other nations. And Zimbabwe is just a nation on its own. And therefore, it's a sovereign nation. And I'm glad that General Bantu Holomisa also emphasized on that all nations are foreign, have sovereignty, and they are independent and free. We relate with them based on our policies and neighborhood, obviously, with Zimbabwe. And then that's how we keep it. Secondly, the Freedom Charter says we are here to strive to maintain the world peace and settlement of all international disputes or whatever nature of disputes by negotiations and not war. And South Africa's posture has never been to declare war on anybody, has never been to intervene, but where we are called to then come and resolve a dispute, as we are in the DRC and as we are in Mozambique North. Those two disputes are with terrorists in Mozambique, and then unfortunately the conflict in the region, in the DRC with the neighborhood. We are there to try and see if we cannot get peace. And we are in the peace missions of SADC in both environments. And we have been in the peace mission of the UN, which put out, unfortunately, in the DRC, in pursuance of finding settlements through negotiations. But obviously, where you need to go and defend whatever is the peace, and then rebel, push back the rebels that wants to create war. That's how we are there. So with that, then we then had to look at why the soldiers are dying in that environment, but agreeing also that they need to go there well equipped. And I think that issue is going to be one of the biggest issues in the GNU, and say, how do you send our soldiers ill-prepared and then not well equipped? And what were the reasons of not beginning to really ensure that we don't lose lives, but we are there to keep peace, but not to die? And I think in the DRC, there are challenges. In Mozambique, we seem to be doing well. And therefore, when we engage on the DRC, we also have to balance on where we have succeeded and where we have succeeded in the past, and such as in Sudan and so forth. The foreign policy of South Africa will therefore not change that much because it was out of the negotiations itself, but obviously we'll look at those issues that needs further refinement, further engagement, things that did not work, and how do we move forward. But there are parties, obviously, in the GNU who are apart ideologically with some of the foreign policy positions of South Africa. And there may be issues around the BRICS membership, I do not know. We are part of the Global South, and it's a membership that we need to honor in the Global South, as the Global South is reorganizing itself not to be dependent on the Global North, but interact as equal partners. So the BRICS membership will definitely be one. And the issue of Zimbabwe will be more on the issues of what is it that we can commonly agree and identify first the points of agreements. And where there are disagreements, then let's engage on those particular disagreements. How the South African policy has been towards Zimbabwe was more to assist them to resolve their internal contradictions, and then so that they can be at peace with themselves, and then so that the people will not have to fly out of Zimbabwe, because when that happens, South Africa is the biggest reception, and then followed by Botswana. So the more the people run away from a government of their own, then you identify a problem with that particular government. And therefore, this engagement on the Zimbabwe question has always been trying to help them resolve their own internal contradictions and challenges. And obviously, the other issue that we have to deal with on Zimbabwe is the issue of the migrations. Why this migration? And the economic element of Zimbabwe, it did collapse that economy, we all know, but the sanctions added more salt to the wound, and to a point where the entire economy was wiped out. But Zimbabwe is on the recovery now. What makes it to be on the recovery is the recovery now pulling back their people, the recovery now making their people to want to stay in their own country. We'll have to look at that. It's early days of recovery, obviously. The results will not be seen now because of the 20 years of challenges that the Zimbabwe had to go through, and then obviously a 1 year indication of recovery will not tell you that now people are ready to go back. And then we'll have to, when we deal with migration in general, as Gugu was saying, and then General was saying, this migration must not be seen as South Africa isolating itself from the rest of the region, neither from the rest of the continent or the global. But our laws are porous. Unfortunately, our borders are porous also. So those issues we will have to engage on, finding mechanism and resolution towards them.
You're muted. You're muted, Ovid.
Sorry, I don't know who, somebody blocked me. I never touched my computer. So it's not me. So I was just in there for the issue of migration is going to be the biggest debate, obviously, within the GNU, even going into the national dialogue on how we have managed it, what are the laws that made us to be where we are, and what is it that we think we need to do to change without marginalizing our being part of Africa, our being part of the SADC, and in Zimbabwe, obviously, is the biggest population of migrants in South Africa, and also how we manage the migrants in our own country. I fully concur with the two panelists who have said that matter. It definitely is going to be part of the discussions in the GNU. But majority of the parties there will not be anti-Africa, they will not be anti-SADC, except some policies, obviously, by some or one of those particular parties in that environment. But me, sitting from where we are, I don't think we'll not be able to find each other. We'll definitely find each other and move on. Let me go towards a conclusion by also saying that the GNU will also have to then begin to, I don't know whether it's a good lesson, General Olomisa, but we did impose a government of national unity in Zimbabwe when they were in trouble, teetering towards a total war, where we had to bring the governing party and the opposition party, MDC, to really form that government of national unity on common issues that were confronting the country. And they were able to go through 5 years of a government of national unity. Maybe because you are there and then Dima party is there, and those who are there, you might then also say, let's go to Zimbabwe and learn how do they manage it for that 5 years with all people who were opposed to each other fundamentally, with a leader then of ZANU-PF who was very difficult old man, but then they were able to go through. So with our own issues, obviously, the characteristics and they are not the same, but also the material conditions might not be the same, but we might then just to say how you sustain it for 5 years. And I think there's something to take a leaf from Zimbabwe on that particular issue. And then, but also the issue of sanctions, if we can all agree that sanctions do not help, particularly if they're unilaterally imposed, because there's this model by the US of wanting to impose sanctions if you don't agree with them. It must be UN endorsed sanctions for anybody we will then respect those type of sanctions. So we might take a view on that one. So let me stop there and say we welcome the discussion. Probably there'll be questions and answers that will arise from the floor. We'll then input on them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bapela, for your contributions in this discussion, reminding us about the ANC's approach over the last 30 years to not only foreign policy with Zimbabwe, but also foreign policy within the region and the continent, and understanding, building us some form of understanding of the regional pressure points that will have to be tackled by the Government of National Unity, issues such as regional instability due to conflicts and insurgency, especially in Cabo Delgado and the DRC, issues around regional instability as an outcome of migration. So all these factors, thank you for enlightening us of the thinking and the processing that the African National Congress has undertaken. I would like now to move on to two respondents in this dialogue. They are both political analysts and activists in their own rights. But I'd like to first start off with Ebna Mosase to give his response to the different political parties' approach towards the situation in Zimbabwe and South Africa's foreign policy to Zimbabwe. And what is your thinking of the issues the Government of National Unity will have to tackle going forward? And what are the potential entry points that various political parties have to find each other on? I would like to hand over to you, Ebna. You may unmute yourself and start your video. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Lwazi, and good morning to every participant on the platform. And it's always a pleasure to see General Gugu that we come with from the student movement going to Rise Mzansi assures me that I'm actually a dinosaur now in the ANC. And obviously, my principal on the other side on the ANC, Comrade Robert Bapela. Let me start on the point that General Holomesa spoke on, that the issues of sovereignty of Zimbabwe will have to be respected. This is the point that is studied well in South Africa. And the exit point on this one is the burden that immigration on Zimbabwe imposes on South Africa versus respecting the sovereignty of Zimbabwe is always going to create a problem. I do know that the ANC envoy did visit ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe, and this issue came very fiercely in the discussions. And the ZANU-PF were quite open and frank that we are not a province of South Africa. We are an independent country, and we're an independent organization. Your engagement with us is not vertical, but horizontal. Whatever the problems that are in Zimbabwe that leads to the pressing down of the economy of South Africa may be issues of operationalization, but must not debase Zimbabwe of its own sovereignty. This is a very critical point that I think the Government of National Unity in South Africa will have to contend with. But I appreciate the perspective of the UTM, and I think they are quite consistent with it that their model is that of consensus building, that they will enter the space of international relations on the basis of partnership and understanding. And I think they've proposed a new CODESA for South Africa, which now plays itself in this process of the government of national unity. The political situation in Zimbabwe itself will need to be studied. The government of national unity that was put after the conclusion of the global political agreement in Zimbabwe, which saw the late president of the MDC becoming a prime minister and President Mugabe became the president of Zimbabwe, also led to the systematic liquidation of MDC as a party. Hence, it has spiraled over through many phases up to the level where it is now called the Triple C. It is also clear that the Triple C may also implode on its own, and there might be a reconstitution of a new political movement which will take the persona of the current leader of the Triple C, Nelson Chamisa. And these are the things that we need to look at, and I think even our GNU in South Africa may study from that particular GNU of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is now the chairperson of SADC Troika, the organ of politics, security, and defense. It's a very critical and galvanizing organ within SADC. And the SADC Observer Mission have actually sort of put disclaimers on the elections in Zimbabwe, have not declared them free and fair, to be quite open. And now Zimbabwe will have to be the ones that are engaging with that particular issue. So this creates a very important matrix for the SADC community and as well as the government of national unity as to how will they be able to interface with that question of elections in Zimbabwe. It is the fact that ZANU-PF is the chairperson, or the government of Zimbabwe is the chairperson of the SADC Troika. It will be interesting to see how that specific one is going to overplay itself. The other problem that we are going to have, especially in the context of the GNU members in South Africa, will be solidarity with Zimbabwe around the problem of sanctions. There are parties which obviously in South Africa vigorously and vehemently push for the pressing of these sanctions, and they are in the GNU, that they must be deepened, and including targeted sanctions towards ZANU-PF leaders. But the ANC has always come out clear that the sanctions against Zimbabwe must be ended, targeted or not, because what the problems of the unilateral sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe by the USA and the European Union are actually hurting the people of Zimbabwe more than the elite that they are targeted to attend to. So it's going to be a very serious problem to contend with moving forward. Now, the issue of immigration, Gugu spoke elaborate on that, but in the context of international relations, we do not discuss immigration. It's not an international relations matter in the African National Congress context. It's a peace and security matter. It's whether the police are doing their work, whether Home Affairs is doing its work, whether the defense is doing work. We moved from the premise that we want to build a better Africa and the world. And on the issue of the contradictions, the economy of Zimbabwe has been the fastest growing economy in the region. But our people have not studied the art of going to Zimbabwe to mobilize or step on the opportunity of Zimbabwe. But we have actually seen parties that have been established to promote xenophobia, Mabahambe and all that, and so on. So we are missing the opportunity, and therefore the East is taking all the resources, the coal, the gold, and all the mineral resources are flying to India and China every day from Zimbabwe, whilst we, the critical actors in South Africa, remain back. When Zimbabwe is in trouble, we are the first one who must come in with agricultural subsidies, with the energy solutions. When there's a political problem, we are the ones who must advance a detachment of leaders to go and conclude political stability in Zimbabwe. But when economic benefits must be reaped from Zimbabwe, it's not happening, but actually the problem come to South Africa with many people coming to get opportunities, economic migrants from Zimbabwe. And these are some of the issues that I want to contend with. I'll just like to leave it at that note, Lwazi. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Abner, for your inputs and your analysis of South Africa and Zimbabwean relations over the last 30 years, and what are the potential entry points and shifts, especially entering the government of national unity, and what are the various political actors have been thinking along this way. I would like to go into our second respondent, Rabone Tau, who's an independent political analyst, to give your analysis of the last 30 years, along with the government of national unity, potential entry points, contradictions, shifts in policy, and all these necessary issues that could become cleavages in terms of the government of national unity building. I would like to hand over to you, Rabone. Over to you.
Good morning, Lwazi, and good morning to the panel. Thank you for their contribution towards this discussion, and for SALO for hosting this meeting. And I think this is a very interesting time, and I will just start off by speaking on what the general spoke about, the national dialogue, because that gives us an opportunity as South Africans to say, what is our national interest? Because you must remember that foreign policy is defined by national interest. And at the moment, we seem not to know what is our national interest, what unites us as South Africans, what brings us together as South Africans. Because if we can unite and be one thing, across class, across racial lines, it will be very difficult, to find that consensus. So we have to start there, and that will then help to also give direction to our foreign policy, which Gugu spoke about. We need a consistent foreign policy. We can't have a foreign policy that is determined by personalities of who's the president of the day, as we have seen in the past 30 years. Like, there's not been much consistency in terms of how the South African government has been dealing with different issues, even in the region, where you can look at Eswatini when there's challenges there, when you look at when there's challenges in Mozambique or in Zimbabwe, So we have to start there if we're to move forward, And yes, the sovereignty of any country must be respected. But as General also says, in his remarks, is about the interests, this sovereignty must not affect the stability of the region, the economy, and the crime that we're seeing. And I always say crime might be high, but people are not doing crime because they want to. It's material conditions that force. We must not speak from a point of privilege where we're comfortable and forget that some people don't even know where they're going to get their meal today. Some people have not had breakfast. They don't know where they're going to get their lunch or their dinner for the day, So we need leadership that is driven by the interests of people, not leadership that is driven by their own selfish, narrow interest about benefiting and making money and deals and so forth, while the people that they say they are representing still live under poverty, still live under very difficult conditions. So for us to fight crime, we need that stability. We need political will from leaders, and the accountability that Gugundima speaks about, because once you don't have that accountability, we can't, as Mam Toko Masho will always say, SADC is a boys club. We can't have a boys club in the region. We need leadership that will hold each other accountable. We need to make sure that there's peace and stability in the region. And these are some of the things Gugu also spoke about when before she spoke about the management of immigration. She spoke about the importance of that peace and security that is important in the region. And also, like what the general was speaking about, about that we can't ignore the instability of the economy and so forth, still region, but we need to have that moral courage that the general spoke about. And one hopes that with this government of national unity, I hear what Obed Babela says, that maybe they can go and learn from Zimbabwe how this government of national unity, but I disagree. Because you must remember that was a SADC mandate, and we don't have a SADC mandate. From 1994, our negotiations South Africa went and done it smoothly on their own without any intervention because of, I think we're very matured as a country, you know, and we've had a stable country for the past 30 years with those negotiated agreements that were there. And yes, now there's the time for a national dialogue that I think that South Africa can still do it on their own, because that government of national unity, we can go and interrogate it, you know, of what really transpired. A lot of things that were not even implemented when you go to look at the GNU itself, you know, and that's why Zimbabwe still remains on the agenda today, because of the things that were not implemented in the GNU. But I'm saying this gives South Africa an opportunity to come together with this national dialogue and say start off with what is our national interest. That will then give direction, because even if we complain about the West, I always say the Americans talk about the American dream. They're clear. Us, most of African leaders, African countries, in terms of foreign policy, is not clear what is our vision, what unites us. So we need to also come to that realization that we need to unite and look at our national interest, and then that will determine our foreign policy. And I think we'll see a change of attitude with the government of national unity, because that will make our leaders to also hold each other accountable, because we can't have a GNU in South Africa of no accountability, no transparency. I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabone, for reminding us, firstly, about the national interest. South Africa currently has a document called the National Interest Framework Document. It's one of the least publicized documents that we have that can potentially fall as some form of framework towards establishing what could be a national interest by the GNU partners. It'll be very interesting to see how the GNU actors interact with that document, and especially trying to establish what truly is the national interest. This is a DIRCO document, and I'm sure the 7th administration will have to circulate it to other departments in trying to establish what they define as a national interest, not only for the 7th administration, but for the future administration in founding consensus on the national vision. And also reminding us the necessity of the political actors in finding one another in creating this common vision. And thank you so much, Rabona, for your contribution to this dialogue. But now we move on to the interesting part, where members of the audience get to chime into the discussion and have your views heard. I would like people on the virtual platform, may you please raise your hands. My colleagues will help me note the various names of the people who have their hands raised. Just come in, raise your comments, questions to the panelists, and even critiques about what you think should be South Africa's foreign policy towards Zimbabwe, and what you think over the last 30 years have been the crowning achievements, failures, or contradictions, and the cleavages that might have arisen. So we must remember that the fundamental shift now in the GNU is the notion of consensus building, and how do we now build consensus within the country? Because for the last 30 years, the African National Congress has been the dominant actor in South Africa's foreign policy space. But how do we now define that in a space where further dialogue and discussion and negotiation needs to happen on a day-to-day basis in order to build some form of consensus to execute foreign policy for South Africa? So I would like for you to raise your hands before I start. Skumbuzo, I see your hand. You may come on. Skumbuzo?
Am I audible?
Yes, loud and clear. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you for maybe the first thing is to indicate that colonialism gave us 52 states of Africa. It was not the ANC. And the sooner we grasp that, the reason we will know that is why there is Zim, there is South Africa, Botswana, and so on. Now that is the premise. Maybe I want to have for my small input to your show, presiding officer. And then the second correction on the input that you made, you know, gray listing. If any country considers anything outside SWIFT and dollars, you are immediately gray listed. So when the BRICS Bank started discussing the issue of the yuan, for example, or what currency can we trade, that is when gray listing happened. It was actually a warning that should you move away, what some are calling de-dollarization, from the dollar, this is what is going to befall you. So as South Africans, we need to understand that, because that is the form of the colony I'm talking about. It's financial colonialism. Now, the second last thing, maybe, Chair, if I may beg your indulgence once more, is just maybe to add a point to one of your panelists. I think his name is Abner. That our foreign policy, no, it was Kuku. Our foreign policy by design is an extension of our domestic policy. It's not true that we don't have a coherent view of what is our security, national, economic interest outside our borders. So with that said, we need to accept that no South Africa can prosper while its neighbors are collapsing, which brings the point of the RECs, because the regional economic committees or blocks, if you like, are a founding base of the free trade agreement that she alluded to. This free trade agreement then talks to the point which I raised, that Africa needs to start doing business with Africa, because as things stand, 82% of all trade in Africa goes out of its borders. And now that is not sustainable. So the sooner Africa trades with itself, some of these countries like Lesotho, Zimbabwe, and so on, ourselves can then start to move up the ladder. Those were just the basic observations I made. I hope I did not take much time. I'm just a normal guy, guys. I'm not a politician. I've never been. It's the first time I come to any international relations meeting. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you so much, Umbuzo, for your contributions in this dialogue and for building some form of understanding on the foundation box of South African foreign policy making. And welcome to these discussions. We'll take on some more hands in this discussion, but I would like to bring on a Zimbabwean into this group concerning reflections of the last 30 years of South Africa's foreign policy on Zimbabwe and what Zimbabweans have been thinking on South Africa's foreign policy. I'll bring on Munjodzi Mutandiri if you're available. Munjodzi, are you there? And also, there are also some questions in the chat box. So how can we strengthen people-to-people engagement through civil society? And I think that's a general question to some of the respondents, along with some of the panelists to answer. In particular, the interconnected nature between South African civil society and Zimbabwean civil society, because the notion of colonial borders, as Kumbuzo was raising, itself, in terms of the relations between the people, it has proven that beyond the structured borders, the people of South Africa and Zimbabwe will consistently and perpetually interact with one another. Even though the arguments around porous borders, we have to accept the reality of people-to-people engagement within Southern Africa. But now, how do we now create the frameworks that we operationalize within the region is a true fundamental question that we need to answer. I'm not sure if Munjodzi is in, but I'd like to bring on my good friend Eddie Mahembe and Sanusha Naidu to come on. So Eddie first, and then Sanusha. Over to you, Eddie.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity. Just to confirm whether you can able to hear me clearly.
Loud and clear.
Good, thank you. Unfortunately, I might not be able to put my camera now, but what I wanted to contribute on are two I thought are very important aspects which have already been mentioned. I think I'll start from the point. He is a discussant. I think Abner. I think in his last closing remarks, he mentioned something which I think is very important, where he mentioned issues to do with South Africa being a brother, a sister to Zimbabwe all over the years, especially where there are challenges, but not being available to take up opportunities where they arise. I think for me, that's one of the key issues which maybe possibly this discussion might need to take forward, especially in the GNU, to say where there are challenges, how South Africa can remain a brother, a sister, and where there are opportunities, how South Africa can also remain as a brother and a sister. That's aspect number one. How that can happen, obviously, it would be happening in the what we are discussing here is South Africa's interests in that sense. But then I also want to highlight another aspect, which I think almost all the speakers have mentioned in terms of South Africa's policy towards Zimbabwe. But I think one can also learn from what the South African government itself said in April 2009, when the Zimbabwe exemption permits were put together. The South African government was very clear that South Africa was helping Zimbabwe by that time because of political and economic instability, which was obtaining in Zimbabwe. So, in other words, the South African government has already noted that there is political instability in Zimbabwe and there is economic instability in Zimbabwe. So, for me, it's very clear from a standpoint of saying, what is the South African government's position on Zimbabwe? Why am I saying so is because the immigrants came in, and so which means maybe one would say, yes, they came in maybe for political reasons. Another one would say maybe they come in for economic reasons. But if both the political and economic issues are not addressed, then the question of saying why, I think Undate Bapela mentioned something to say there has been a turnaround, and why are Zimbabweans not returning? The reason is already there, that the political situation has not been resolved. The reason is already there, that the economic issue has not been resolved. So in other words, whatever policy position the government of South Africa, or especially the government national unity, it has to come in to say, how do we resolve the political and the economic? And I say it in that order because that is exactly the issue. As long as the political issue is resolved, it's easier to resolve the economic, because we have seen that wherever there has been political stability, the economy was stable. But when the political instability crept in, then the economy became unstable. So that would be my contribution to say South African position is clear. There is political and economic instability. Therefore, I would suggest that the government of national unity starts from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eddie, for your contributions. I'd love to move on to Sanusha and then to Ambassador Common-Smith. Sanusha?
Thank you very much. And again, a wonderful timely discussion, and thank you to SALO for organizing it. I think I echo most of what has been said regarding the dynamics of South African foreign policy under the construct of a GNU-led government, and to what extent that would actually find traction. But I think what's more important for us to also start thinking about is some of the dynamics that we are also seeing in terms of SADC protocols and what the SADC context looks like. Because I think the SADC context is important for us to understand the normative framework. And one of those normative frameworks is around how do you deal with elections, the SADC model law issue and the framework on that, which has been now talking about that in a much more real way in terms of how do you deal with the political dynamics, but also how that kind of links back to the economic dynamics, but also to the electoral democracy processes. And to what extent the SADC Parliamentary Forum, which is now being defined as becoming a much more engaged and a much more more than just a forum, a much becoming a SADC parliament of note. How do you deal with those kinds of dynamics in terms of when you look at elections? And I think those are some of the lessons that we need to extrapolate in terms of when elections are not necessarily about just whether you get political freedom, but whether it's about how do you define those very questions that we're asking about in terms of the consensus in the region, what is sufficient consensus, but also aligning and domesticating some of those protocols around the normative electoral processes and the questions around when do you find that those electoral processes have discrepancies. They're not necessarily ones that are considered to be free or fair, or there are some kinds of irregularities. How do you deal with that from a regional perspective? Because I think now that South Africa is in this context and this construct of coalition politics, or a GNU, or the political landscape has been reconfigured, we've got to think about how that reconfiguration also lends to some of the other dynamics that are emerging within elections that are coming into the region, but also in terms of what the mandate is from the electorate to the political parties that are contesting elections. So these are 2 or 3 of the dynamics around domestication, and where do we go to in this context? We spoke a lot about Zimbabwe, but I think there are other countries in the region that also we're beginning to see a shift and a change. And I think one of the key lessons for us is not to look at Kenya with far lenses, but to look at Kenya as lessons that we have to think about, where we look at a youth and a population in Africa that is supposed to be a dividend. But if you don't actually nurture that dividend and you actually enable that dividend to be included, then it becomes a very destructive disruption. And so the question would really be, in terms of the region, in terms of South African foreign policy, is not to necessarily look at ourselves in terms of where we want to position ourselves in the context of how do we want to move particular moving parts and talk about the integration and the political questions, etc. But rather, I think, is how do you domesticate and how do you strengthen the normative frameworks within the context of the region, particularly where elections are being disputed, and there's a sense that there's a disconnect between where the electoral processes are becoming key to how you see people then looking at the election and saying, we want this election to actually conform to a regional set of normative standards and principles. I'll leave it there now for Lwazi, but just for some of those things to be thought about in terms of the SADC model law and looking at the SADC parliament, and more importantly, the role of things like the organ on politics, defense, and security. Because it's not enough for us to just talk about what our foreign policy will look like in a kind of construction and architecture and an ecosystem, but it is about taking those principles, values that we saw that are governing the GNU, but going back to what the president said in his inaugural speech last week, and that is about the human rights, the multilateralism, the question of a just, equitable world order, but a just, equitable region as well.
Thank you so much, Sanusha. And reminding about the instruments that we have regionally, the SADC principles and guidelines towards democratic elections are a very critical document that underpins the region's perspective of what underpins free and fair democratic elections, and how do we now translate that into the regional. You raise very critical questions that I suspect some of the political parties will want to engage on, especially in the discussions within the Government of National Unity. So thank you so much, Sanusha, for that contribution. I'd like to move on to Ambassador Smith, and then Mrs. Akele Makanya as the next speaker. Over to you, Ambassador Smith.
Good morning, everybody. I just have a few points that I would like to make based on the discussion. So if you look at what we're facing right now, I think sometimes we miss doing the analysis on the historical context of things. I think I've raised this several times in other discussions. Yes, it is our relations to Zimbabwe, but it's broader than that. And I like what the general said earlier when he said that we need to look at the regional context of things. It would then mean that we need to go a bit back. And Skumbuzo, he highlighted, you cannot just move forward on policies based on forgetting what happened in history. So that is the one area. Then, and how the OAU was established and what was its purpose and how it unfolded into the AU. Then you also need to look at the time of our democracy, there was the fall of the, it was the end of the Cold War, and you saw a ushering in of a new world order of neoliberalism and neocolonialism. Then in the context of that, there was also the development of globalization. Now, if you take politics and you don't bring economics as a fundamental core, you miss a lot in what is being discussed. So if you look at the IMF and the World Bank in its role within the context of the region and how that also impacts in terms of elections, as well as in terms of delivery to the ground, that notwithstanding the development of an elitist group that are beneficiaries of the economical system as it's defined. I think at some point, we really need to ask ourselves a question as Africans: how do we define ourselves within our own space as Africans, according to what we actually need? It would be important. And then we were not there with the establishment of the UN. And one of the questions a couple of months I asked when there was a UN delegation is the rules-based order for who? Because is it the rules that is being defined on a global level, defining us as Africans? And if we want to be a formidable trading bloc with others, we have to have some kind of level of economic integration. And then lastly, I would want to say that if we want to deal with the foreign policy and deal with our African agenda, we need to start looking at what are the homegrown solutions. Because if you go into history before colonialism, you'd find that we actually had mechanisms that really worked for us. And we never look at that. We always look at what is modernization, and we go with the trend in terms of modernization. But there is so much value in where we actually come from before colonialism that you could modernize into today's trajectory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Smith, especially unpacking the understanding from a historic perspective and dealing with contemporary indigenization of African solutions for African problems. So thank you so much, Ambassador Smith, for your contributions in this discussion. I'd like to move on to Sizakele Makanya for your comments. Sizakele?
Thank you for the opportunity, and I will just be short, and because a lot has been said by our fellow speakers, but I would just to mirror on a few points that have been raised, particularly on the domestic policy, that it should mirror what we do in the continent. Our medium-term strategic framework, priority 7, that speaks about our foreign policy, informs about better South Africa, better world. On the issue of regional integration, one could actually say that economic developments ambitions that we have as South African can't ignore Zimbabwe. And that is quite critical for our foreign policy. Looking at the fact that Zimbabwe is a landlocked country. South Africa currently is gearing up for reforms in terms of various policy frameworks. We just witnessed the president signing into law various economic laws inside the country. and that are quite fundamental for our foreign policy. For instance, the reforms in the ports that cannot ignore the fact that Zimbabwe is a landlocked country. Just yesterday, we had a very massive conference here in the country in Sandton, the conference that had to do with Africa Rail. South Africa cannot ignore Zimbabwe when we talk about rail issues. We know that Transnet, it runs across SADC region and all that. So I would like to echo the same point that has been, presented by Abner, who said South Africa has been there when days were dark for Zimbabwe in all aspects, whether economically, whether politically, but then we can't afford to have other countries taking advantage of the economic situation in Zimbabwe without being present as South Africa. So I just wanted to flag on that, and thank you for this wonderful and quite informative discussion. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Sizakelo, for your contributions, reminding us about the level of integration that we have with the people of Zimbabwe and the necessity for us to keep on building upon the necessary infrastructure to keep to live up to the aspirations of regional integration and having cordial and neighborly relations with the people of Zimbabwe, because we cannot avoid the political crisis as South Africa or the economic crisis with our neighbors. Along with our neighbors, cannot afford to have a political and economic crisis within South Africa. Due to the interconnected nature of our continent and region. I would like to give like a few people to comment, then I'll move on to the final speaker, back to the panelists for this discussion, and also highlighting some of the questions some of the audience has had, and some of the commentary around the audience on what South Africa and Zimbabwe relations can be molded, and some of the things to be considered by Government of National Unity actors, especially considering trade with Zimbabwe, issues around democratization within Zimbabwe, issues around regional integration, and issues around migration, and issues around peace and security. So they are it's a multi-layered issue. And when we talk about the issues of our region and how do we now manifest or engage in this new constructed model of South Africa's governance in the democratic era, I would like to move back to some of the respondents. Was Ebna Musase raised the critical point about the ANC's historic engagement within Zimbabwe, but I'd like to ask Ebna, I'd like to ask NEC member Obe Babela about the global political agreement, along with the Atlantic Commission recommendations that have been facilitated within Zimbabwe, and what is the ANC's perspective on how do we take those forward? Because we had the global political agreement, which South Africa was a key mediator to, which created the Government of National Unity in Zimbabwe. We've had other Government of National Unities within the region, such as in the instances of Lesotho, where South Africa was a key actor in the mediation process of that, and now South Africa itself has a Government of National Unity. So I'd like to ask NEC member and Deputy Chairperson of the ANC's International Relations Committee, Obe Babela, what is the thinking now in this context about how do we now move the dialogue forward with all the pressure points that the various panelists have highlighted, along with how do we now improve the relations and build on entry points to improving the relations, because there's a fundamental agreement amongst GNU actors that we need to grow our economy, we need to foster greater trade within the region and the continent, and we need to deliver for our people. And it seems like even the issues around migration are interlinked to the economic and the political paradigms, as Eddie has highlighted earlier on. So I'd like Mr. Babela to please unpack some of the ANC's thinking around the future process. To Mr. Olumisa, I would like for you to please, for the UDM's perspective, because we heard you talk about issues around migration and crime, but we would like to also question the question, how do we now better integrate the people of the region within our societies, and what is the UDM's perspective on regional integration and finding common consensus amongst our regional actors to develop our economies, especially when we are facing such divisions within not only the political space within Southern Africa, but also in the global geopolitical arena, as we've seen in the recent EU elections. The ideological divisions are clearly contrasted there, and along with now in Kenya, the young generation rising up against tax reforms. So how do we now foster relationships that takes our region forward, as the UDM will now play a very critical role in the government of national unity? And to Rise Mzansi, what are the potential entry points to younger political parties, especially engaging on a transnational level, in engaging other political parties in Southern Africa about common agendas that they need to push, not only in their parliaments, but also in various governments? I would like to go back to the panelists in that order. Mr. Babela, and then Gugu, and then Mr. Olomisa. Mr. Babela?
No, thank you very much, Lwazi, and thanks for the questions that came from a number of people. Some were quite instructive, more educational, more reminding us where we come from, and also for us really to link up with historical context, which obviously they are part of engaging, debating, discussions in understanding what is happening in the global situation, and continuously assessing a balance of forces, and also looking at agendas that might reverse some of the progressive gains. And maybe just to respond to one which was alluded to me, but the others, I take it as a context that is for informing and educational. Riboni said that he will not agree with us having to go and learn the outcome on the lessons learned in the GNU in Zimbabwe. And as we were concluding, Lwazi, you said we also had a similar arrangement and still an arrangement in Lesotho. So there's things to learn in African context. We, as Khumbuzo was saying, we're all colonized. There's neocolonialism. Probably we might then pick one or two lessons. They may not be the same, and I did qualify my statement that material conditions and characteristics are not the same, but there might be similarities in certain aspects of such GNU. So, and Carmen, thank you for also saying that Africa for African solution, because we tend to run to go and learn GNUs in Europe and elsewhere, and not also beginning to look at the continent itself. Kenya might provide you also with another scenario when Odinga and Kenyatta had to form a government of national unity at some point. So let's also take African lessons. What works and what doesn't work? What will be similar to us? Then we go and understand that context. And then so that as we walk this 5-year journey now, imposed on us by the voters and the people of South Africa, we take every care, we take lessons learned by others. We also do not repeat mistakes that they might have done at the same time. On the issues that we are raising around our agenda with Zimbabwe, the program of engagements continues at party-to-party level. The recent meeting been held this past week when I was in Russia with a delegation of ZANU-PF, attending the anti-colonialism and anti-neocolonialism and anti-imperialist formations in the Global South, and the BRICS political party meeting that was taking place there. We did engage on our situation and also had to ask them around their situation at the time, and the issues that have been resolved and those issues that were not resolved. I remember that in that GNU, one of the agenda items was the review of the electoral laws of Zimbabwe, and then also the review of the constitution of Zimbabwe. That task was carried. Whether it was to the satisfaction of all, obviously something else, but at least they were able to carry the reform on the constitution and the reform on the electoral laws. But obviously there's still issues that are still of differences within the political formations in Zimbabwe and within the Zimbabwean themselves. And we just have to then continue to engage on those issues where there are still stark differences, and then begin to see if they cannot harmonize towards a conclusive aspects as were agreed in Lona. So we will continue to engage both at the government level, party to party level, but we will also be sharing experiences as former liberation movement very soon. South Africa will be hosting that meeting before the end of this year, where lessons learned in the South African outcome of the elections, the Angola elections, where the ruling party nearly lost, won by 51%, and then the opposition with 49%. Our situation of being reduced to 40%, and Namibia is going to elections in November. Mozambique is going to elections in October. They are also now beginning to say, what is it that we are learning from South Africa? So those lessons will have to be engaged, and then so that we could then begin to then share notes and aspirations. But as we said, that the global agreement in Zimbabwe will continue to assess and view which areas are not satisfactory. But the elections in Zimbabwe also taught us something, the recent ones. The violence was not at the higher scale, or there were no violence incidences as such, but obviously those who were observing elections did raise certain aspects that then goes to the electoral laws of Zimbabwe, then to say there are certain things that still needs to be panel beaten in that particular area. We might then have to say, even if ZANU-PF have won by almost 70%, it does not mean the question of Zimbabwe issues is done and done, because it might raise ugly head in the near elections in a very different way. So the sooner we tackle it, the better, so that we could then begin to have a long-term harmonization of electoral laws in Zimbabwe. There seems to be issues that are still outstanding in that particular environment. So we should not be undermining the voices that are still raised. The issue of human rights is still an issue that also ought to be continued, even though the elections were relatively not as violent as the previous elections in Zimbabwe, which is an achievement for Zimbabwe to have really conducted elections in the manner in which they did. But the electoral law issues will definitely continue to deal with them. But otherwise, a better Africa and a better world is the way to go. But some of the issues might be more the tactics that the GNU might then have to look at. But obviously, those who do not agree with certain positions, obviously they'll express them. There's a dispute mechanisms if there such matters need that. But it does not mean going into the ANU are going to be throwing everything that is good that South Africa has done and done well. And then I think quite a number of parties, a majority of them, I hope, will then be agreeing with those particular positions, except for those issues of migration that still needs further debating and crafting, and so that we can soldier forward as a country, being part of the SADC region, integrated, and also be part of Africa, and then part of the global South, but part of the global world order that is just, fair, and equitable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Papela, for your contributions. I'd like to move on to Ms. Gugundina for your piece.
All right, thank you. I just have 3 submissions. And the first one is that I believe that we need to strengthen the African Union's capacity to resolve conflicts in Africa to achieve human security, peace, stability, and development. And this alludes to some of the things that were raised by colleagues in terms of, if there's issues in relation to elections, where do people go? Are we able to actually address that at a continental level, at a regional level, in a way in which it instills confidence amongst citizens? So we have to work with the AU and other regional leaders to increase Africa's capacity to conduct effective diplomacy, which is very important mediation and peacekeeping. And that will speak subsequently, resolve some of these issues we have at economical level. We urgently need to operationalize the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement so that we increase market access and opportunities for companies across this continent. And once you're able to do that, you also speak to other issues of immigration and so forth. So you would have resolved a number of issues that are currently characterizing conflicts around the continent, but also issues of why people are migrating to other areas. In South Africa specifically, we believe that we need to fix the asylum seeker system. So we need to stop its use as a de facto permit for economic migration. Rebone Dao spoke quite importantly about the issue of economic migrants, and we've blurred the line. So everyone gets asylum when they come to South Africa, but in essence, we've got this issue of economics. So if you resolve the issue of diplomacy, peacekeeping, and stability, subsequently, you'll be able to resolve some of these economic issues that you've got across the continent, more specifically in the SADC region. And once you've built that relationship, I think a classic example is the new Partnership for Africa Development, which was initiated by former President Thabo Mbeki, as well as the peer review mechanism, which is a way to hold leadership accountable. Then you would have had a platform where you actually raise these issues, but also you're able to have a platform where you manage the flow and treatment of inward immigration through diplomatic engagement with neighboring countries. So whether we like it or not, we need to hold leadership accountable in this issue, more especially with regards to migration, whether it's economic, whether it's asylum seeking. Because if you don't have that at an AU level, if you don't have that at a regional level, you will continuously have this problem. More importantly, where people on the continent feel that they've got an institution or an organization that hears them when they've got issues within their own country domestically. So these are important aspects that we need to raise. And I think at a GNU level, these are some of the things that have to be spoken of. And just also at an international level, we, as South Africa, will be hosting the G20 summit, if my memory serves me correctly, in 2025. And it's an opportunity to re-establish South Africa as an African leader as well, but also submit some of these issues that we've got that also impact us globally. That's my submission. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gugu, for your submissions into this dialogue and reminding us of the various regional and continental reforms that need to be undertaken to produce a conducive environment for our citizens to live to the best of their abilities within this continent and within this region. So thank you so much, Gugu, and thank you for honoring our invite. I'd like to move on to Mr. Olomisa to answer some of the questions and some of the issues that you'd like to leave the audience with in your inputs. Thank you so much, Mr. Olomisa. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson. The regional integration is a pity that SADC has not shown leadership in the last 30 years, I'll say it so. I still remember when I was still head of Transkei government, I used to attend or engage the events of SADC when Simba Makoni was the first secretary of SADC, if I'm not mistaken. When I look at the progress we have made in SADC, you feel that we lack leadership in the last 30 years. Look at the ECOWAS of today. They are doing a far better job in coordinating the integration of their region. Perhaps the grandchildren of ours are going to talk serious politics about this region. I visualize a situation where they might want to take the process further and talk federal system of Southern Africa. In doing so, maybe we should pave a way for that generation by establishing what I would call a quasi-federal system, where we will talk about the economy, we will talk about security, some elements of foreign policy, and environment. Right now, we are faced with the effects of the climate change and energy and infrastructure. We should be moving with speed, and politics will catch us on the way. But if there is no political will, of course, to address these issues in the region, then we will continue to have these talk shops. We have been talking about SADC. Look now, as a result of lack of coordination and leadership, the issue of Mozambique would have been addressed by SADC and provided security from SADC countries. But we ended up getting a foreign
We can't hear General.
I think we might have a technical issue with Mr. Olomisa's connection. He did allude to that he is experiencing network problems. So I highly apologize. Should he come back on, we might allow him to give complete his contribution. But I'd like to move on to Rebone and Abna for your final inputs and your general reflections around this dialogue, and what can we look forward to as the regional community in Southern Africa, and also as South Africans, in terms of building relationships with the people of Zimbabwe, along with other aspects that were highlighted by the General, especially that interesting idea of broader discussions within the region and the creation of a quasi-federal system that to allow those dialogues to happen at a regional level and ensuring that integration, which is a very interesting idea that I would like some of you to reflect upon. Over to you, Abna.
Yeah, thank you, Lwazi. No, I think we also are going to need a GNU at a regional level, because the politics of the region are quite fluid. We can see we are watching what's going to happen in Namibia on the 27th of November this year. We have seen what happened in Angola last time and the dissatisfaction in Zimbabwe. We have been seeing the developments in Lesotho, and many other countries. So I think one of the things that will have to happen is that a GNU at a regional level will be necessary as well. It's not going to be, the politics moving forward is not going to be a uniquely South African thing. But nevertheless, in the context of South Africa, the GNU is going to give an opportunity for many political parties to indulge on international relations. Because if you check, with less than 3% of the population of South Africa is interested in international relations, irrespective of the fact that we come out of a struggle of international solidarity in South Africa. Many people are focused on the bread and butter issues that are happening domestically without giving regard on the surrounding countries around them as to what is it that can be moved forward. So the GNU is going to be a political school to a large extent to deepen the understanding of the Freedom Charter, because I think the ANC is one of the few organizations in the GNU that have got a lot of active politics around international relations. Many other organizations, it's just a by the way issue. The main focus is immigration more than the context that has been laid by the Foreign Service Act in South Africa. So, but I think it's going to be a very wonderful opportunity to the commissariat that will be established around the GNU will help taking these issues to society, which will now heighten public diplomacy, and Zimbabwe will benefit greatly from that united effort of various political parties in South Africa interfacing now directly with the issues that are happening in Zimbabwe. So SADC continues to do what it can. It needs to strengthen its secretariat to be able to interface with the day-to-day work and the multi-stakeholder organizations that are all over SADC must also unite themselves towards the resolutions of the problems that we have in the region, especially the remaining problems in Zimbabwe. The Troika, during the massacres in Swaziland in the July of 2021, I think, tried to intervene, but no result came out of the interventions of the Troika, giving credence to what General has said, that the SADC seems to be toothless on a number of fronts. So it is the responsibility of this GNU to reach out to the SADC region to give firepower to SADC to deal with impending problems that may be causing regional and country political instability, social and economic instability as well. So let me leave it at that point, and thank you for inviting us to engage in this wonderful opportunity. It was the richness of ideas that we accumulated here that we think will push in the context of the government of national unity.
Thank you so much, Abner, for your contributions and your analysis in this discussion. It is very highly valuable. I'd like to move on to Rebone Tau for your parting shots and some of your thinking and around South Africa's approach to Zimbabwe under the GNU arrangement. Over to you, Rebone.
Thank you, Lwazi, and thank you to the panel and SALO for hosting this as we end this discussion. Interesting enough, just before this meeting, as I'm preparing for another meeting, so I had to call my contact in Namibia, just to get the dynamics, as we just spoke about also Namibia going to elections in a few months' time. And what is very interesting with this, he's also an analyst, a professor in Namibia, that what is interesting that SWAPO is actually worried, looking at what is happening in South Africa. And I was just thinking that if you look at South African and Namibia, we're like brother and sister because of our histories linked, we know that they got also the independence on the eve, and South Africa was also at the center at the time of those negotiations when they got their independence, under the then apartheid regime, so our relations with them are very different from most of the role players in the region, But one of the things that was raised, that they face also the same problems, the issue of unemployment, service delivery, and corruption, which we know that was also at the center of these elections in South Africa. But I'm thinking here, thinking that as we speak about SADC as an organ, and the EU just had the elections a month ago, and these are some of the things that as we move forward, how do we then say, when we talk, like for example, we talk about the reforms at the UN Security Council, how do we talk about the reforms at SADC? Probably maybe we should also look at having a SADC that goes to elections, and maybe then we'll see a SADC that approaches things differently, because it won't be a by the way that it's a balls club, but because people will be there based on merit or based on the votes that they would have gotten, through the votes, I think I will end there, and we're hoping that this GNU will give us a foreign policy that is consistent, not for today, but for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebone Tau, all the way from Europe, actually. So thank you for giving us your time and engaging in this discussion on this very critical topic. And we, as the South African Liaison Office, have been doing this since 2006, building consensus and driving the agenda of human rights, democracy, and trying to build continental solutions for continental problems. And part and parcel of why we do this is to build consensus amongst the various political actors, civil society, the diplomatic community, and all people of this region and continent. By having such discussions amongst these various political actors, we are then inculcate ourselves into a broader regional program that will choose to seeks to build a better future, not only for ourselves, but our future and future generations to come. So I would like to thank you and hand over to SALO board member, Amoli Dlamini, to give a vote of thanks to everyone. Over to you, Modi.
Oh, okay, thank you, Lwazi. And may I just take your chairpersonship and allow Ndate Babu Holomisa just to finish his final thoughts, because we lost him a bit just before we were rounding up. General, over to you.
Well, I was almost at the end, but what I was about to say is that perhaps in this proposed summit of SADC region, we would have to insist on its secretariat to give us the way forward of some sort, especially on issues related to climate change, environment, and the noise about developing the infrastructure. We need programs and timeframes. You see, sometimes in the politics, honorable member, former deputy minister, you like to talk without any program. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me on this. I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, General Bantu Holomisa, the leader of UDM. I'd like to also thank the NEC members, also the Deputy Chairperson of the International Relations Committee, Obed Babela. I'd like to thank Gugu Ndima in absentia. She has now left, the spokesperson of Rise Mzansi, and also thank our respondents, Comrade Abner Musase and Reboni Tau. And just to say a few words, the general has proposed something, and general, you are saying this I think you are now saying this in different platforms, because recently in an interview also spoke about this dialogue that we need in the country, following following the democratic dispensation of 1994, to say 30 years later, what can we talk about? And can we also talk about the economic emancipation, which is probably the subject, one of the subjects that still needs more dialogue from the South Africans themselves, and to say, let us also add the foreign policy elements in that national dialogue will be critical. And somebody spoke about Swaziland just now. I think it was Abner or someone else, and how the conflict that erupted just a few years ago, well, maybe not even a few years ago, there was talk about a national dialogue, and we did not see that happening, and we thought SADC was going to take it forward. And now the question is, what can SADC do? Or what is it that is different that South Africa can do within SADC, considering that South Africa has always wanted to take a multilateral, or rather an approach where everybody participates. But what we also heard today, really coming from the comments from people, is the importance of us developing together as a region, so that we can be able to solve individual country problems, especially individual economic country problems, if we develop together. South Africa's economic development cannot happen in isolation of Swaziland's economic development, Lesotho's economic development. The Zamazamas, we spoke about the Zamazamas. What can be the solution for the Zamazamas? Zimbabwe has something, has a solution because it allows for artisan mining. Should we legislate and legalize artisan? Okay, sorry about that. I think somebody was not muted. Should we legalize artisan small-scale mining, so that people don't have to be committing to be doing it illegally? But also we also come from an era where the issues of the region, you had friends, when maybe or rather friends or comrades were in the trenches together, where you had former President Mugabe and some ZAPU leaders, you had SWAPO, you had Frelimo, people, the ANC, MK people who were in the trenches together, leading the SADC countries. Now that you have a new crop of leadership with new president in Angola, in Mozambique, there will be a new president soon in October. In Namibia, there's a new president. Can those kind of presidents converse, considering that they were not friends before and they were never in the trenches together? Can they be open to each other? Can they challenge each other? And if they can't challenge each other, what form of bridges can be there to bring them together, since they did not serve in the liberation movement together like the previous crop of leadership that we had in SADC?
I think you're muted, Molly.
She is frozen because she's still in the system, but yeah.
Yeah. So as Sis Molly was alluding to, as we wrap up this discussion, we would like to thank our developmental partners, the Norwegian People's Aid. We would like to thank our speakers for having this dialogue. We'd also like to thank the audience at large for joining us in this discussion. As SALO, we commit ourselves to further these discussions as we have done since 2006, and along with trying to find African solutions to African problems. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Good day and goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Much
Bye.
appreciated.
Thank you. Go start.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.